Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. This is Retro Fun Tech. So finally, Sega gets a little love from one of the handheld companies. We keep seeing retro handhelds that look like a Super Nintendo controller or the Nintendo Game Boy. Now Sega fans can rejoice with the Anbernic Arc. Let's check it out. The Anbernic Arc is what the Game Gear should have been. It's a nice mix of the Sega Saturn and Sega Genesis controllers, but in a nice Game Gear retro handheld form factor. If you are a Sega fan at all, you need this. The D-pad is very similar to the Genesis or Saturn controller D-pad. I don't have either of those controllers to compare, but there are a few other creators that have done a super in-depth comparison. Along with the curved form factor of the device that just screams Sega! On the top we have some stacked shoulder buttons, 2 USB-C ports, the left is the charging port and the right is the OTG port for a controller, which we will test out later. Next we have a mini HDMI Out port, a function/menu button, the volume buttons, and the power button. We have a 6-button layout on the right side. This turns out to be an amazing feature, as you will see during the gameplay. The start and the select are on the front, as well as 2 stereo speakers at the bottom, which are very nice sounding. The bottom has a reset button, 2 SD card slots. The left is the operating system, the right card is for games. And in the middle of the cards is a headset jack. Nothing on the sides or the back, except these kind of ergonomic bumps, which make holding the device very nice. So let's jump right into the tech specs. Now I will say that these specs are not super impressive, but they work. After all, for the Arc, it's more about the form factor than anything. There are 2 models of the Arc. The S model, which stands for single OS and runs on Linux, and the D model, which dual boots into Linux and Android. I opted for the S model, and I will explain why here in a moment. So the specs are almost identical for both devices. The difference with the D model is that it dual boots into both Android and Linux. It has a touchscreen, and it has 2 gigs of RAM. Also, it comes in 2 other colors that aren't available with the S model. Solid black, which has the nostalgia of a Genesis controller, and what they call the gray model, which is like the Japanese Saturn version. So I purchased this during the pre-sale from Anbernic. Now you might be wondering why I didn't go with the D or dual OS model. I know it's only $20 more, and no, money wasn't the reason at all. It mostly had to do with everyone complaining that the Android model doesn't come preloaded with the Google Play Store or any Google services at all. Now I know I could have just sideloaded it, but honestly, I didn't want to be bothered with that, and I was really more thinking about everyone that is watching this video. As much as I wanted to test out the Android functionality of the other model, I didn't think it was a smart move for Anbernic to not put the Play Store on here. I didn't want to go through a review of the device, knowing that when I'm talking about how to sideload a handful of APKs, the new users out there will likely get confused and frustrated. So, long story short, I opted for the S model just to show everyone in my review.
Groovy!
So I grew up on Sega. All my friends and family had Nintendo growing up. It was neat for me going over their house because I always got to play Nintendo. But it was hilarious having someone come over to my house because they didn't understand what Sega was. And after I showed them, they loved it. I had the Sega Master System, and Alex Kidd was my Mario. Then 1990 hit. I had a subscription to the Sega magazine that was showing off pictures of the Genesis and the Game Gear. They launched in the US roughly about the same time. I remember all I wanted was a Sega Game Gear. I was mesmerized by the color screen and huge chunky form factor of the device, not to mention that it was portable. It was worlds cooler to me than the Game Boy, which had a grayscale screen. Well, I ended up getting a Sega Genesis instead of the Game Gear. It's totally my parents' fault. They talked me into getting the Sega Genesis so that my little brother could play games with me. It ended up working out, and after years of therapy, and now having this little channel as a hobby, I may have made amends with my childhood. Right from the beginning, this device is giving me such an awesome nostalgic feel. It's so cool to have a device that is geared towards Sega games and has the 6-button layout. Now granted, most Genesis games aren't utilizing the full 6 buttons. That really didn't come into play until the Genesis had another version release. Then you have the 32X, Sega CD, and Sega Saturn that all use the 6-button layout. I love the 6 buttons. Even if I'm playing a game that only uses 3 buttons, it's nice to have them in a row. Also, I don't have to guess on a retro handheld what buttons are what, because they tend to be different on every handheld that I use. Even non-Sega games work pretty well on here once you figure out the controls. Another cool feature of the 6-button layout is that it's awesome for fighting games and arcade games. Just a quick note here, this is showing the demo for Mario Tennis on N64, and it's having a rough time. You might get games to work here and there. Like I usually say as a caution, this device isn't geared towards anything really above 32-bit systems. If you get them to work, then high five to you. They should be thought of as bonus systems. But with that being said, N64 was really the only system that I saw a lot of lag on. Dreamcast, Saturn, and even PSP, from what I tested, were definitely playable. It's going to honestly depend on the game. Also, just to note, I am using the emulator section for these top 4 systems. That's why they're running so well. So I would suggest if you do get this device, definitely do that. Do not run these systems in RetroArch. Also, I just wanted to show off the HDMI Out function. It works really well with my GameSir Bluetooth controller plugged in. Ta-da! Road Rash. I love this game. So real quick, we'll go over the good and the bad of the device. Sega love. This device gives so many nostalgic feels of awesomeness. Finally, we just have some love for Sega. The D-pad and the buttons are amazing on this device. I love the 6-button control scheme and hope more handhelds come out using them. So for the base model of around $75, you can get some neat features such as an HDMI Out port that you can sort of consoleize this device, and you can use it as a standalone controller with a PC. Now the bad. The lack of power. It would have been nice to have a little more power in this device so that you could play more games in the higher systems, especially Saturn. I mean, because look at the device. It's geared towards Saturn. So what I tested is fine, but I have heard of others having some issues. And the colors. So this annoyed me from the start. Anbernic decided that they would only have the transparent colors for the S model, and the solid black Genesis color, and the gray-white Japanese Saturn color for the D model. Why? It drives me nuts when companies do this. Just make all the colors available for all of the models. It's that easy. Software. It's a little simplistic and slightly clunky on the S model. Not terrible, but they didn't give the option of adding a ton of customization features. or even scraping box art. I didn't even get into that. Hopefully custom firmware will come out for this and solve all of that. Also, speaking of software, why isn't the Google Play Store on the D model? I am well aware that you can sideload all of that, but we shouldn't have to do that, Anbernic. Come on. My final thoughts are this. If you are like me and grew up with any Sega console, you owe it to yourself to check this out. The level of nostalgia that this handheld brings outweighs the fact that this device isn't super powerful. Speaking of which, like I said earlier, and tend to say a lot more on the budget-friendly devices, don't get this device if you were just looking to play systems above 32-bit. I look at anything above PS1 as a bonus. Really, any system that has a joystick should be thought of as a bonus system for this device. All in all, I really had a lot of fun playing this handheld. I am a Sega junkie at heart, and this just gives all the feels. I showcased most of the games that I grew up with, and that was a ton of fun for me. I hope that we will see some custom firmware for this device that will really help it shine. So, what are your thoughts on the Anbernic Arc? Are you going to pick one up? Do you want to see companies make more handhelds that are a throwback to some of the retro consoles? I personally do. It's something different out there. Why not? Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and even share this video with someone who absolutely loves Sega, or who knows who on earth Alex Kidd is. Thanks for watching. Stay awesome, everyone, and go play some games.